Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Beijing rolls out the red carpet for the U.S. president. Donald Trump calls talks with his Chinese counterpart great, but Xi Jinping reiterates that Taiwan remains China's hardest red line. Now, Iran calls on BRICS nations, that includes founding member China, to challenge what it says are international law violations by the U.S. and Israel. And Seoul reportedly leaning towards blaming Iran for an attack on one of its cargo ships 10 days ago near the Strait of Hormuz. And Taiwan's Foxconn beats expectations with record first quarter profits, driven by surging demand for AI servers, even as geopolitical risks linger. A warm welcome and a sharp warning. Well, that was a message from Chinese President Xi Jinping as he received U.S. President Donald Trump for their summit in Beijing. And you are looking at live pictures from the state banquet in Beijing. And this is happening at the Great Hall of the People. And it's been reported that the American leader has arrived, Mr. Trump. And you are also seeing business titans from the Trump administration side about attending this lavish banquet. Now, Mr. Xi telling Mr. Trump that Taiwan remains their most important issue, warning that if mishandled, it could lead to clashes and even conflicts. Well, now we're witnessing President Trump walking up the red carpet, about to enter the Great Hall of the People for an evening that's hosted by President Xi, and it is expected to be a lavish banquet. And it is part of the formal state visit program and the key ceremonial set piece of the day. And a little later in the program, we will be crossing to our correspondent for more analysis of this lavish banquet. Now, the two leaders had met earlier for about 2 hours behind closed doors at the Great Hall of the People, discussing thorny issues from trade to regional security and global tensions. Mr. Xi, at the same time, also hailing what he calls China's new positioning in ties with the U.S., describing them as based primarily on cooperation but with measured competition that will allow for lasting stability with controllable differences. And Mr. Trump says that relations with China is going to be better than ever before. And we've got our correspondents from both sides of the Pacific joining us live. We've got Tan Sihui in Beijing and Nick Harper for CNA in Washington, D.C. Well, we're going to kick things off with you first, Sihui. Walk us through some of the key highlights of today's summit.
Well, today's summit's highlights were definitely that handshake between Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi. That handshake was something and a moment that the entire world was watching. And also that trip and tour down to the Temple of Heaven, Mr. Xi hosting Mr. Trump, similar to what happened in 2017 when Mr. Xi hosted Mr. Trump at the Forbidden City. So the first day was really more about stabilizing ties rather than striking any sort of deal. And we can look at this at the communication and the kind of tone that was being set between the two leaders. We saw that economists had said that there was a new kind of status that was announced during the speech by Mr. Xi and Mr. Trump. They had agreed on a new status of the relationship called a constructive, strategic, stable relationship. Previously, China had considered the U.S. as a new major type of power, whereas U.S. saw China as a new strategic competitor. And so this new kind of definition and new status redefines their relationship. It doesn't remove their rivalry, but it sets the boundaries for their relationship, and it doesn't spiral out of control. And so there's a new sense of optimism and cooperation between the U.S. and China. And of course, the Taiwan question featuring very highly during talks between U.S. and China. Mr. Xi telling Mr. Trump that Taiwan question remains the most important issue between China and the U.S., saying that this is the biggest common denominator and that the U.S. must exercise extra precaution when it comes to the Taiwan issue, saying that Taiwan independence and cross-strait peace, they're just like fire and water. Now, analysts I spoke with say that Beijing is likely wanting to get something out of the U.S., and they're saying that this comes after the KMT chief's visit to Beijing, also seeing a distracted U.S. in the Middle East. So they're trying to get something out of the U.S. by pushing the Taiwan issue. Also, analysts noted that it's interesting that Mr. Xi did not bring up anything to do with Japan, knowing that U.S.-Japan relationship is strong, and also that China had issues with Japan, especially after the Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi had mentioned that Japan will not stop in terms of intervening into Taiwan if China ever attacks Taiwan. And so this was the overall mood and highlight of day one, really more about stabilizing ties and ensuring that it is a constructive partnership.
All right, Nick, I want to bring you into this conversation now. What about, from the U.S. point of view, the perspective of this meeting that the Trump administration is likely to push to its domestic audience?
Well, in his opening remarks, Donald Trump said that this was going to be the biggest summit ever. He knows that he is under domestic pressure here back at home. He's seen inflation rise and his approval ratings drop, largely due to the Iran conflict. That has pushed up prices here in the United States. And he knows that the clock is ticking on those midterm elections in November, now less than 6 months away. So really, he needs to come home from this with sellable wins, things that he can say to the American audience that he has been able to do in China that will benefit their lives, which is perhaps why the readout from the White House about how this meeting went highlighted the issue of Iran. The US saying that China had agreed with the United States position that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, also agreeing with the United States that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open. And this US readout also suggesting that China was prepared to buy American oil to lessen its own dependence on oil coming from Iran and the Middle East. Now, those are all sellable wins to US voters looking ahead to that midterm election. But really, it's also about the deal making that will get done. Some of those big deals we're expecting during the course of this coming day. There's some confusion already about beef exports. We're expecting China to buy more. Initially, Chinese customs data appeared to renew exports for 400 US beef producers before temporarily putting them on hold. Farmers in the United States, a big constituent of the Republican Party, they've been hit hard by the trade conflict. Also, soybean farmers, we're expecting a big announcement about that. China potentially buying 25 million metric tons every single year for the next 3 years. So all of those things would be things that Donald Trump could bring home and very much spin as a win.
Now, Su Hui, can't help but notice there's a bit of contrast here in terms of China's portrayal of today's meeting with the U.S. Why is that?
Well, there's definitely a contrast with Mr. Trump, and in his opening speech, he called Mr. Xi a great friend, called Mr. Xi a great leader, even though other people do not want him to call Mr. Xi a great leader. And there is a contrast in terms of their diplomatic styles, but it doesn't mean that they're diverging in their talks. And so there is a difference in their negotiating styles, because Mr. Trump is more of he veers more towards a personal diplomacy, whereas Mr. Xi sticks towards more a state-led diplomacy. It also shows a difference in their priorities. Likely, Mr. Trump wants to strike a positive tone at the Trump-Xi summit, whereas Mr. Xi wants to strike a tone of stability and calm. And so there is that contrast, but it doesn't show that they are deferring their talks and what they have agreed upon. And this also is being seen in the lighthearted moments throughout this summit so far. We saw even the Chinese army soldiers standing stoically, even as the Air Force One plane was coming up right behind him. And also we saw it in lighthearted moments in the U.S. delegation with Tesla's Elon Musk cheerfully, happily taking pictures and videos at the Great Hall of the People. And also the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he was also looking at the ceilings in the Great Hall of People, and they were really mesmerized. And so you can really see that stark contrast.
So, Nick, I have to touch on what Mr. Xi said about drawing some really strong red lines on Taiwan. How do you think Mr. Trump and his administration, how are they likely going to handle this?
Yeah, this is the strongest indication yet that China is very much saying to the United States, hands off Taiwan, stay out of Chinese affairs. That warning from President Xi that it could lead to clashes and even conflicts. Now, in theory, there would be no change in the US position when it comes to Taiwan. The White House said that going into these meetings, that the US didn't intend to change its foreign policy, its long-term position. Interesting to note that in terms of the US readout about what happened in this meeting, there is absolutely no mention of Taiwan. The US simply describing the meeting as a good meeting, saying that it focused on Iran, but also economic cooperation. So leaving out that idea that President Xi has challenged President Trump about Taiwan. And that warning may come as a result of the arms package that was agreed by the US Congress back in December, the biggest aid package, arms package ever agreed from the US to Taiwan, totaling $11 billion. And that might be why we saw such a stern warning there from President Xi.
Now, Sihui, the lavish banquet that we've been talking about, we are still, waiting for footage to see Mr. Trump himself in the Great Hall of the People. But just walk us through. I mean, we know that who's who will be there. So just walk us through the guest list and, just tell us a little bit more.
Well, the banquet is really a reflection of Beijing's broader strategy for the summit. They want to use the symbolism and the ceremony to create a stable atmosphere, even as difficult structural issues remain unresolved. So I don't have the list of the dishes that will be coming out tonight, but what I do know is that they have a Huaiyang cuisine that will be featured very much at today's banquet. This cuisine is from the southeast part of China near Shanghai. Really known for meticulous knife skills, preserving the ingredients' natural flavor, and really presents a broad appeal, is widely accepted and accessible to many people around the world. And so even though I don't have the list for this year, I have the list for 2017. And some of the dishes are coconut-scented chicken, bean curd custard, kung pao chicken, and they are known to be from the Sichuan region. And so maybe this year they're switching things up to their guests.
Right. Well, thanks, Sihui, for that. Well, we are just looking at some footage there. We have Trump Jr. Entering the banquet, and we are still awaiting to see U.S. Trump. I believe, actually, we have it there. We are about to see President Xi and President Trump entering the banquet hall. President Xi and President Trump seated side by side as the state banquet is about to begin. And this evening, we will certainly be also watching out for the tone of the speeches, perhaps the toasts, and any language on partnership and stability. And of course, we will be bringing you More from the banquet from Hui a little later.
对中国进行国事访问举行的欢迎宴会现在开始。
The welcoming banquet hosted by President Xi Jinping for President Donald J. Trump now begins.
首先，请习近平主席致辞。
Now a toast by President Xi.
And now President Xi will be making a toast.
尊敬的特朗普总统、女士们、先生们，很高兴为特朗普总统对中国进行国事访问举行国宴。首先，我代表中国政府和中国人民，对特朗普总统和美国代表团表示热烈欢迎。
Honorable President Donald J. Trump, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to host the state banquet in honor of President Trump during his state visit to China. On behalf of the Chinese government and people, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to President Trump and the U.S. delegation.
这是一次历史性访问。今年是中国15开局之年，14亿多中国人民立足于5000多年中华文明深厚基础，正在以高质量发展全面推进中国式现代化。今年也是美国独立250周年，3亿多美国人民正在重振爱国、创新、开拓精神，推动美国发展迈向新的征程。中美两国人民都是伟大的人民，实现中华民族伟大复兴和让美国再伟大，完全可以并行不悖，相互成就，造福世界。
This is a historic visit. This year marks the start of China's 15th five-year plan for economic and social development. The over 1.4 billion people of China, drawing on the rich heritage of our over 5,000-year civilization, are advancing Chinese modernization on all fronts through high-quality development. This year is also the 250th anniversary of American independence. The over 300 million American people are reinvigorating the spirit of patriotism, innovation, and enterprise, and ushering in a new journey for the development of the United States. The people of China and the United States are both great peoples. Achieving the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and making America great again can go hand in hand. We can help each other succeed and advance the well-being of the whole world.
55年前，尼克松总统派基辛格博士访华，中美开展乒乓外交，双方官民并举，推开了中美冰封20多年的大门，成为当代国际关系史上重大事件。此后，中美之间以很多开放合作的故事，不断书写着友谊的佳话。新形势下，我同特朗普总统顺应两国人民和国际社会期待，通过多次会晤和通话，推动中美关系保持总体稳定。
55 years ago, President Richard Nixon sent Dr. Henry Kissinger to visit China, and ping-pong diplomacy was carried out between our two countries. Through efforts of the two governments and peoples, the door that had remained frozen for over 20 years was opened, marking a milestone in contemporary international relations. From then on, China and the United States have written many chapters of friendship through mutual openness and cooperation. Under the new situation, President Trump and I, fully aware of the expectations of our two nations and the international community, have had multiple meetings and phone calls and kept China-US relations generally stable.
今天，我同特朗普总统就中美关系和国际及地区形势深入交换意见。我们一致认为，中美关系是当今世界最重要的双边关系，只能搞好，不能搞坏。两国合则两利，斗则俱伤，应该成为伙伴而不是对手。我们同意构建中美建设性战略稳定关系，推动中美关系稳定、健康、可持续发展，为世界带来更多和平、繁荣、进步。
Today, President Trump and I had in-depth exchanges on China-US relations and international and regional dynamics. We both believe that the China-US relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. We must make it work and never mess it up. Both China and the United States stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. Our two countries should be partners rather than rivals. President Trump and I also agreed to build a constructive China-US relationship of strategic stability to promote the steady, sound, and sustainable development of China-US relations and bring more peace, prosperity, and progress to the world.
尊敬的特朗普总统先生、女士们、先生们、朋友们，纵观中美关系发展历程，能不能做到相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢，是中美关系能否稳定发展的关键所在。当今世界变乱交织，中美关系承载着两国17亿多人民的福祉，关乎世界80多亿人民的利益。我们应当共同扛起这个历史重任，推动中美关系这艘巨轮沿着正确的航道平稳前行。
Honorable President Donald J. Trump, ladies and gentlemen, friends, looking back at the course of China-US relations, whether or not we could have mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation is the key to whether the relationship can advance steadily. The world today is changing and turbulent. China-US relations concern the well-being of the over 1.7 billion people of both countries and affect the interests of the over 8 billion people of the world. Both sides should rise up to this historic responsibility and steer the giant ship of China-US relations forward, steadily and in the right direction.
最后，我提议为中美两国发展繁荣和人民幸福，为中美关系的美好未来和两国人民的友谊，为特朗普总统以及在座的各位朋友的健康干杯。
Now please join me in a toast to the development and prosperity of China and the United States and the well-being of our people, to the bright future of China-US relations and the friendship between the two peoples, and to the health of President Trump and all the friends present. Cheers.
干杯。
Cheers.
谢谢习近平主席。
Thank you, President Xi.
现在请特朗普总统致辞。
Next, a toast by President Trump.
Well, thank you very much. This is a great honor. It was a fantastic day. And in particular, I want to thank President Xi, my friend, for this magnificent welcome. And it really was a magnificent welcome like none other. And for so graciously hosting us on this very historic state visit. We had extremely positive and productive conversations and meetings today with the Chinese delegation earlier, and this evening is another cherished opportunity to discuss among friends some of the things that we discussed today, all good for the United States and for China, and it was a great honor to be with you. Please.
感谢习近平主席。今天我们度过了非常美好的一天。首先要感谢习近平主席这一盛大的欢迎，那么也非常感谢在这一次历史性的国事访问当中非常慷慨地接待了我的代表团。那么今天早些时候，我们跟中方进行了富有成效以及具有建设性的对话。那今天晚上将是我们另外的一次机会，能够共同再次讨论我们今天早些时候已经讨论到的一些问题，以及我们的共同利益，以及我们如何能够为全人类塑造更好、更安全的未来。
The relationship between the American and Chinese people goes all the way back to America's founding. The first American consul to China, Samuel Shaw, arrived on the first American trading ship to reach these shores in 1784. The Chinese merchants had a name for the Americans. They called their visions the New People. 2.5 centuries later, that first connection has grown into one of the most consequential relationships in world history.
美国人民和中国人民之间的友谊可以追溯到美国的建国之初。那么，美国的第一任驻华大使萨缪尔·肖先生，在1784年乘坐第一艘美国的商船到达了中国的沿岸。当时中国的商人是这样称呼到来的美国访客，他们将当时到来的美国访客称为一个崭新的民族。250年后的今天，这一个当初的友谊已经慢慢地演变成为当今世界当中最举足轻重的关系之一。
From the beginning, our citizens have shared a deep sense of mutual respect. Founding Father Benjamin Franklin published the sayings of Confucius in his colonial newspaper, and today's sculpture, recognizing that ancient Chinese sage, is carved into the face of the United States Supreme Court very proudly.
从一开始，我们两国之间的人民就已经有深厚的相互的尊重。美国的国父本杰明·富兰克林曾经在他的殖民报纸当中刊登了孔子的《论语》，而今天在美国最高法院建筑物的门前，可以说有一个雕刻，这个雕刻就是为了向中国的这一名古代的圣人进行致敬。
The appreciation ran in both directions. Chinese admirers of President George Washington gifted a stone tablet honoring his memory to adorn the Washington Monument. It bears the words of a Chinese official who called the great general and statesman a hero among men.
这一种欣赏是相互的。那么，许多中国人非常崇敬乔治·华盛顿总统。那么，这些人当时就向美国捐赠了一个石碑，就是为了纪念华盛顿总统。目前这个石碑已经镶嵌在华盛顿纪念碑里面，石碑上刻有当时的一名中国官员形容这一名伟大的将军和政治家， 他们把它称为人中豪杰。
And across the centuries, this mutual esteem grew into a relationship that reflected the tremendous talent and potential of our two people. Chinese workers helped lay the railroad tracks that connected our Atlantic coast to the Pacific. American travelers to China helped spread literacy and modern medicine. And at the request of China's ambassador, it was President Theodore Roosevelt who provided the funds to establish President Xi's alma mater, Tsinghua University.
在过去几百年当中，这种相互的尊敬已经成为了一段全新的关系。这段关系可以说反映出我们两国人民之间巨大的潜力以及我们的努力和智慧。中国工人当初帮助美国建设了我们的铁路路轨，连通了美国的大西岸和太平洋沿海地区。美国当时早期出访中国的美国人也帮助中国提升了识字率，并且引入了现代医学，并且应时任中国驻华大使的请求，罗斯福总统也专门提供了资金，成立了习主席的母校清华大学。
As allies in World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt's mentions of the brave people of China, that's what they were, drew loud cheers in his speeches in the United States, and everybody loved what he had to say, just as many Chinese now love basketball and blue jeans. Chinese restaurants in America today outnumber the 5 largest fast food chains in the United States, all combined. That's a pretty big statement.
那么，作为二战期间的盟国，罗斯福总统在美国的多次演讲当中提到了勇敢的中国人民。正如当前许多中国人非常喜欢篮球和穿蓝色的牛仔裤，在美国目前的中餐厅的数量要比美国前5大快餐连锁店的总的店面还要多。
This bond of commerce and respect that stretches back 250 years is the foundation for a future that benefits both of our nations. The American and Chinese people share much in common. We value hard work, we value courage and achievement, we love our families, and we love our countries. Together we have the chance to draw on these values to create a future of greater prosperity, cooperation, and happiness, and peace for our children. We love our children, this region and the world. It's a special world with the two of us united and together.
And there's President Trump there. He was just giving a speech and a toast at the state banquet in Beijing. And he talked about how he received a magnificent welcome like no other. He also said that he and President Xi had productive conversations earlier today, and with also a cherished opportunity to discuss many other things. We are going back to President Trump again as he continues his speech at the state banquet.
基于合作、幸福、和平的未来，为我们的子孙、为本地区以及全世界造福。
Thank you again, President Xi, for this beautiful welcome. And tonight it is my honor to extend an invitation to you and Madam Peng to visit us at the White House this September 24th. And we look forward to it. And I'd now like to raise a glass and propose a toast to the rich and enduring ties between the American and Chinese people. It's a very special relationship. And I want to thank you again. This has been an amazing period of time. Thank you, President Xi.
那么再一次感谢习主席，感谢这一美好的欢迎。那么今天晚上，我也想借此机会向您以及彭女士提出邀请，于9月24号邀请你们出访白宫。那我也希望，针对美国人民和中国人民之间深厚的以及持久的友谊，我提议我们进行举杯。那么我们这两国关系是非常独特的一项关系。
Thank you, everybody.
感谢，
Thank you, everybody, very much.
感谢。
President Trump just closed his speech there with an invitation to President Xi and his wife, Peng Liyuan, to visit the White House on the 24th of September this year. All right, for more analysis on the speeches we just heard from President Trump and President Xi, let's once again go over to Tan Sihui, who is standing by in Beijing for the latest takeaways. So, Sihui, we heard there...
both sides delivering very warm and meaningful speeches. Both sides saying that this was a historic state visit. Mr. Xi saying that and noting that realizing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and making America great again can coexist, complement each other, and benefit the world. Now, they also emphasized that the China and U.S. relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, and he hopes that both sides will make it work and not mess up. And it says that China and U.S. stand to gain from cooperation instead of confrontation. While over on Mr. Trump's side, he talked about how the relationship went all the way back to the America's founding father, respect stretches for 250 years, and a future that both are cooperative will benefit both nations, and he had encouraged that both sides would encourage and keep it and also grow values, and this would have a greater future in terms of happiness and peace. And he had also extended an invitation to Mr. Xi and his wife to visit the White House in September this year. So really, these diplomatic dinners are really less about solving problems immediately. It's more about creating that trust and political space needed to manage these problems. And that's especially since the issues on the table are highly sensitive. We're talking about Taiwan earlier already, Mr. Xi mentioning that this is the most important issue to U.S. and China. Any kind of mishandling would lead to clashes and even conflicts. Another sensitive issue, trade conflicts. We saw how the tariff war had almost lost control last year. And so these issues are really front and center, including the current Iran war, which has become part of the conversation because of energy security concerns and the broader regional instability linked to the conflict. And so lots was said at the state banquet. Both of these leaders will meet again tomorrow, and we will be expecting more from tomorrow. And already I am getting some updates from the U.S. Stating that there are some large orders from Boeing, large China orders to Boeing, also some orders in terms of oil. So lots to go on about, but we haven't got any confirmation from China, which we will be waiting for.
All right, many thanks for that update. Tan Sihui speaking to us live in Beijing. Well, plenty to unpack on this Trump-Xi summit. And for more insights, let's bring in Jean-Pierre Cabastan, an emeritus professor of political science, the Department of Government and International Studies at Hong Kong Baptist University. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. So, quite a packed day for both presidents, their administrations. In a nutshell, we heard what President Trump just did, which is extending an invitation to the White House to President Xi and his wife on 24th of September. We also heard from Sihui, there have been some talk about maybe some oil and some orders to do with aviation, for instance. So, Professor, tell us in a nutshell, what are some of the biggest takeaways you've gleaned from today's summit?
I think, first of all, it's the truce between Beijing and Washington, D.C. is going on. truce which was initiated in Busan last year, October last year. And there's a willingness on both sides to stabilize the relationship very much and to focus on trade and economic issues. As you know, Trump would like to see American firms having a better access to the Chinese market. China, on its part, would like to get better access to American top technologies. And what we can see as a concrete result for the time being, either there will be some deal on a number of issues, a number of items like the aviation, Boeing planes, I guess, soya beans, maybe beef meat, and also the establishment of a board of trade. Now, on Taiwan, I haven't seen any result yet. I think that Xi Jinping made a very important point in indicating if they can't agree on Taiwan, there are risks of crisis and even war between the two superpowers. I think it's a very strong starting point to the negotiation. Whether they will agree on something new, it remains to be seen, because on the US side, there's a lot of pressure not to give in to Chinese demands on arms sales to Taiwan, on the Beijing's request for the US to oppose Taiwan independence. So I'm not expecting too much new development on the Taiwan issue.
Yeah, just picking up on that Taiwan issue, of course, it remains the most sensitive red line in the relationship between both countries. But from what we know, it's been reported that Taiwan was not mentioned in the White House readout of the Xi-Trump meeting. So what does that say, though? I mean, does that tell us there's been a shift in balance?
Well, we haven't reached the end of the visit, so I'm sure they're going to talk about Taiwan, because there was a Xinhua report indicating that Xi Jinping made a very important point regarding the risk of crisis and war between the US and China if they can't agree on Taiwan. So I think for China, it's important to talk about Taiwan, and there's a willingness on the American side. Trump has indicated that to talk about various issues, including arms sales to Taiwan, whether the US will make some concessions on that, like in promising to reduce arms sales to Taiwan, or to even to negotiate to Taiwan. I think remains to be seen. I don't see that very likely, actually.
And there's also been a lot of talk about this new positioning, which is, they're pitching it as it's going to be led by cooperation and measured competition with manageable differences. So, Professor, in terms of how does that translate, though, to concrete actions? I mean, what does that mean in practice?
Can you repeat your question? I didn't get it. Sorry.
Throughout their message, the messaging as such of this new positioning, how President Xi said that this could be led by cooperation, competition can be measured, differences can be managed. So how does that, though, translate into action?
I think there is a need on both sides to cooperate, at least on the where it's possible to cooperate. There are two major economies, two major powers. And they don't want to see the relationship derailing and leading to more uncertainties and more instability. So now, in concrete measure, I think there will be more trade, but also more negotiation on political issues all the way from Taiwan, but also Iran, the situation in the Middle East, and also in the Indo-Pacific region as a whole. Including, U.S. relations with Japan, Korea, and other allies in the region. I mean, there are many issues on which they can talk. Whether they're going to agree on every issue, of course, it's far from being the case, I think. So they have to agree to disagree on many issue, and that's the way forward, I think. But to keep the channel of communication open and to intensify or densify those channels of communication in order to make sure that the relationship will remain stable.
Right, appreciate your time and thoughts unpacking the Trump-Xi summit for us. Jean-Pierre Cabestan, an Emeritus Professor of Political Science, the Department of Government and International Studies at Hong Kong Baptist University. Tariffs, technology, and Taiwan. Hard issues front and center for the Beijing summit between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. But there is a softer side to the relationship between the superpowers. Crystal Chia has all the details.
Olga Soltes was 17 when she went to Beijing for a game of table tennis in 1971. It was her first trip out of the United States, and she had no idea it would make history for US-China relations. 55 years later, Olga and her teammates from that time are back in China to commemorate the event.
I don't think we knew what to expect even, so going into this totally different world was amazing. And then when we went out of the world, everybody in the United States, we were in every magazine and everywhere, we couldn't believe it that it was such a big deal, But it was and still is.
Yeah. Olga was one of 9 players from the US table tennis team who went to Beijing at the invitation of then Chinese leader Mao Zedong. They were the first delegation of Americans to visit the country since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. They were welcomed by then Premier Zhou Enlai and toured landmarks such as the Great Wall. The trip started what became known as Ping-pong diplomacy and paved the way for then President Richard Nixon's visit to Beijing the following year. This year, commemorations were held in both Beijing and Shanghai. The Beijing event was attended by Vice President Han Zheng, who read out a congratulatory letter by President Xi Jinping. Scholars say these efforts are no coincidence, happening before a summit between President Xi and US President Donald Trump.
This is so historically important, but also urgently matters to the Trump's visit. Just as the 1971 ping-pong visit preceded President Nixon, February 1972 visit to Beijing, China is consciously invoking that same template ahead of Trump's visit.
China is a rising power. So the idea of China is not shared equally between Chinese and non-Chinese. But when ping-pong players get together, the message is crystal clear. That's power of shared vision, shared history. So maybe we could once again remember the lessons we learned from ping-pong diplomacy. If the Chinese leaders and American leaders can achieve something miracle at that time, why not now?
There are other groups of people who have seen the softer side of China-US relations. There are the Flying Tigers, a group of American pilots who fought for China in World War II. Their descendants were invited to China's military parade in 2025. President Xi Jinping himself has a relationship with Iowa. In 1985, he visited the state as a provincial official and stayed with local hosts, forming a bond that state media continues to report on. And China's panda diplomacy, another branch of its cultural outreach. China recently announced a new pair of giant pandas will go to Zoo Atlanta in the US for 10 years.
The key insight here is that hard diplomacy and soft diplomacy, they are not alternative, right? They work in sequence. So when citizens in both countries see friendly cultural exchange, such as the panda in the US National Zoo, it becomes much more politically easier for leaders to make concessions on hard issues.
Olga and her teammates believe that sports offer a platform for nations to connect.
Everybody's so nice to us, and we come here and it's warm and we like each other. Why can't the world be like that?
They hope that the spirit of ping-pong diplomacy will continue in a world that needs it more than ever before. Crystal Chia, CNA, Shanghai.
And time now for your business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, the market's obviously closely tracking the high-stakes summit between Trump and Xi. How did it go?
Well, regional markets were mixed today. China's blue chips taking a breather after hitting a multi-year high yesterday, but others are still buoyed by positive AI sentiment. Mainland equities markets ending in the red. Investors reacting to few concrete outcomes from the opening phase of those high-stake U.S.-China talks. Shanghai Composite ending the day 1.5% lower. Second bourse, the Shenzhen component is down by more than 2%. Hang Seng Index did start the day in positive territory, but ending the day flat. The U.S. has reportedly allowed 10 Chinese companies to buy NVIDIA's H200 chip. That's as CEO Jensen Huang is in China with President Trump for his summit with President Xi Jinping. Reuters reports that the companies include Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, JD.com, Lenovo, and others. Taiwan's Foxconn is also reportedly on the list. The U.S. had imposed export curbs on NVIDIA's advanced chips to China amid growing rivalry. Now, before the restrictions, NVIDIA commanded around 95% of China's advanced chip market, and the country accounted for 13% of the chip makers' global revenue. Despite the approval, it is still unclear if Chinese companies will go ahead with purchases of NVIDIA chips. This after Beijing restricted its own companies from buying them over national security concerns. The world's largest contract electronics maker, Taiwan's Foxconn, reported a record net profit for the first quarter, beating expectations on the back of sustained strong global demand for generative AI tools. Net profit for NVIDIA's biggest server maker, as well as Apple's top iPhone assembler for the January to March period, came in at $1.6 billion, and that's up 19% on the year. It reported a 30% on-year jump in first quarter revenue last month. Foxconn, formerly Hon High Precision Industry, is maintaining its forecast for strong revenue growth this year, but it warns geopolitical risks, supply chain shifts, and raw material costs could weigh on the industry. The company expects capital spending to rise 30% from last year, and for AI server rack shipments to more than double. It is also expanding into electric vehicles, seen as a key future growth driver. Company shares have risen 6% so far this year, underperforming the broader Taiwan weighted index, which is up 42%. They closed 2.6% lower today, ahead of the earnings release. And that's the business update. Useli.
Thanks, Roland. Our Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has called on BRICS member states to condemn the US and Israel for their actions against Iran, which he says are violating the international law. Mr. Araghchi said that, quote, the West's false sense of superiority and immunity must be shattered. He further called on the bloc to prevent the politicization of international institutions and to stop warmongering. Iranian state media are also reporting of Mr. Araghchi accusing the United Arab Emirates of direct involvement in military operations against his country.
Those who pursue reckless adventures may believe it furthers their geopolitical interests. But as consumers and governments around the world now sense and understand, regional instability is a lose-lose proposition for all sides, including the aggressors.
Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said that safe and unimpeded international waters are crucial for the global economic well-being. India's foreign ministry also condemning an attack on an Indian-flagged ship off the coast of Oman yesterday as unacceptable. It remains unclear of who carried out the attack. This all comes amid reports by the UK Maritime Agency of a vessel being seized off the United Arab Emirates port of Fujairah. The vessel was said to be boarded by unauthorized personnel while at anchor and is now headed to Iranian territorial waters. South Korea says it was unlikely that anyone other than Iran was responsible for an attack against a South Korean-flagged vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. Seoul has been looking into the explosion and fire that broke out on the vessel on 4th of May. Investigators say it was caused by a strike by two unidentified flying objects. The suspected attack destroyed the engine room and left a 7-meter deep puncture on the ship's stern. A technical analysis team was deployed to Dubai to support ongoing investigations into the attack. Well, no one among the 24 on board was critically injured, though one seafarer sustained minor injuries. South Korea has strongly condemned the attack, though it remains cautious about making prejudgments on who was responsible. Singapore regulators have issued an advisory on agentic AI platform OpenClaw, citing limited built-in security controls like authentication gaps. In its first such warning to organizations, the Infocom Media Development Authority advised users against unrestricted access to files and applications. Doing so may run the risk of having sensitive data leaked to other external AI model providers. Now, IMDA also highlighted other key concerns, and this includes OpenClaw's lack of maturity given the limited security testing prior to its release. Over 400 cases of vulnerabilities and exposures were reported. A quarter were considered highly severe, which could have led to data theft. IMDA recommends users to use multiple platforms with narrow and clearly defined roles instead of creating a single and all-powerful agent with unrestricted access. Human approval should also be implemented through a system-level controls as a guardrail.
Third one is more about treating every input as untrusted, because OpenClaw is connected to your Slack, your email. So just make sure that whatever is actually coming as an input, it could attempt to manipulate it. So be wary of that. So in a way that these three things, if basically being operated in a disciplined manner, will help us to reduce the cases that may basically happen in terms of a cyber attack or bigger than that.
And on that note, we wrap up Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can also find us on all the socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.